Hi everyone, this is Tanya from Flying Dog Studio. Thank you so much for joining me as I add another page in my Wonder Journal. Before we get started, let's take a look at the supplies I have for drawing. There is the Mono Eraser by Tombow. I love that thing. Then I have a mechanical pencil. You can use a mechanical pencil or any kind of pencil you want. And this one, by the way, is from Lamy. All of these supplies I'll have listed down below so you can check that out. Finally, I have a kneaded eraser. If you are new to the channel, welcome. I'm so happy you're here. If you have been here before and you're back for more, I thank you so much for returning. If you're unfamiliar with what the Wonder Journal is, this is a new series I've started. This is, as I said, entry number 2. I'll have that playlist down below for you if you want to check it out. But basically what a Wonder Journal entry is me doing art about something that I've read about in the Bible, that I'm wondering about and I've done research on. So you're going to get some explanation about the art, explanation about whatever I'm studying and how it applies in the Bible. But before we get started with that, let's talk a little bit about the art and about my process. This is a watercolor sketchbook, and again, I'll have that listed down below for you. And all I'm doing is sort of a gesture drawing. I'm trying to be really, really light on the paper. Most generally, when I'm working on watercolor paper, it's not in a sketchbook, and I prefer to draw it out ahead of time and then transfer that to the paper by tracing. That way, I already have the lines I want and I'm not erasing too much. And I'm going to be doing something a little bit different this time. Instead of just using the pencil and then coming back with one of my fountain pens and tracing over it, I'm going to be using a colored pencil to get my lines in, and we'll see that in just a few minutes. Now let's talk about what I'm drawing while I'm drawing it out. This happens to be a terebinth tree. And if you've read the Old Testament in the Bible, and if you haven't, if you're not familiar with the Bible, that's okay. Don't hop off, hang in there, because it's kind of interesting to see how it all works out in history, because that's what the Bible is. The Bible is history. And to see all of these things work together and relate to each other and to be talked about in books that were written hundreds of years apart is just absolutely fascinating. At this point, I'm sure you're wondering what I found fascinating about the terebinth tree. Well, at the time, I was looking through things and went down a rabbit hole. I didn't know I was going to end up under a terebinth tree, but that's exactly where I landed. I was actually looking at the story of David and Goliath. I knew that it was on the land of Judah, but I didn't know the exact location, so I was researching that, and it took place in the valley of Elah. I thought, well, okay, I want to have a mental image, so I go online and I look up the valley of Elah, and what I find out is that another name for the valley of Elah, what it actually means, is the valley of the terebinth tree. So there is your terebinth tree. When I started doing a little more research on the terebinth tree, I found that it is mentioned 16 times in the Bible. And whenever something is mentioned that often, I kind of want to go check it out a little bit more. So the first thing I did was try to find out what exactly is a terebinth tree and do they still exist today? And the answer is yes, they do. They are sometimes called the turpentine tree. And that didn't sound very appealing to me, but I kept reading about them. And what I found out is that this tree can actually grow up to 33 feet tall. That's pretty tall. Let's take a look at the pencil that I'm using. This is a Prismacolor Premier pencil. It is number PC 1063. It is a 50% cool gray. I wanted a little darker gray, and I'm sure I have it here somewhere in all the art supplies, but we've been rearranging things and I can't find it. But this worked fine, and it'll work fine until the next time I want something a little bit darker. So what I'm doing is I'm knocking back the lines on here. Using the kneaded eraser, I want to keep the lines. I just don't want them to be so strong. I want the colored pencil to do the talking for me. I'm going to go over it with the colored pencil. Here it is. I'm going to be using the same technique as if I were using one of my fountain pens. And if you don't know, the way I do that, if you haven't seen these before. I like to use thick and thin lines, and I like to skip between areas and not draw solid lines. So I'm trying to do that, the same process, but with a colored pencil. I'm going to keep it kind of a gesture drawing. I'm not going to be really exact on this. And I'm even going to be doing some shading in here with this colored pencil. So that's my process on this. I'm also looking at my reference photo, and I'm going back and forth, and I'll have that reference photo down below for you. I got it from Wikimedia Commons, and you can follow along with this if you want to. You don't have to use a colored pencil. If you want to do this and you want to skip the colored pencil part and just use the pencil, you can do that as well. It's up to you. It's your art. So let's go back now and talk a little bit more about some of the facts on the terebinth tree. And one thing that I found super interesting is that it is a flowering plant that's part of the cashew family, which that appealed to me because I love cashews. In addition to that, in order for the tree to be viable, it has both male and female trees. Both of those trees have to be present in order for the tree to be viable. So this is one of those plants in the plant kingdom that has a both male and female tree. Very cool. It is a strong tree that can survive in areas where other trees cannot. It's a very useful tree. Its fruits are used in baking and in making a type of coffee that also appealed to me. Its gum is used to tan leather, and you can make soap from its oil. But the number one thing, and we're going to hear about this again in scripture coming up, it is known for its resilience, as it can grow back from its stump if you cut it down. And that's pretty cool. So now that we know all about the terebinth tree and the facts about it, let's take a look at it in history. As I said, the terebinth tree is mentioned 16 times throughout the Bible. This is just a 30-minute video, so I don't have time to go through every single one of those, but I did want to show you how it is used to travel through an entire family line, generation after generation, all the way to Jesus. So again, hang in here with me. In order to do that, I have to go all the way back to the beginning of the Bible. And no, we're not going to go through creation. Creation's already happened, and we already have the fall of man, and God's ready to clean house. So he talks to a man named Noah, and Noah has 3 sons, and his sons have wives, and he has a wife, and God tells him to build a boat because there's going to be a flood. If you don't know the story, I'm going to link stuff again down below, all the verses that I'm using, so that you can go back and look at it for yourself, because you never need to take my word for it, or anyone else's word for it for that matter. Always look it up for yourself. So we're taking a look at Noah's sons, but in particular, we're looking at Shem, because through Shem, we get the line of Abraham. So Noah would have been Abraham's great-grandfather times 8. So great times 8. That's how far back he was. And God noticed Abraham. At this point, all of the people from Noah's family have spread out. There are many people. And God comes to Abraham. And at the time, his name was Abram. He wasn't called Abraham yet, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And he told him that he needed to leave his family, his father's family, take his wife, and to head to the land that he would give him and that he would give to his descendants. So he picked Abraham out. He saw something special in Abraham. So Abraham obeys him, and it says in Genesis 12, 1-3, "Now the Lord said to Abram, get out of your country, from your family and from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I will make you a great nation. I will bless you and make your name great, and you shall be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse him who curses you. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." Abraham obeys. He takes his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot, and they head west. If you haven't checked out my first entry in this Wonder Journal, I encourage you to do so, because we talk about the gift of myrrh and that it came from the Magi, and we talk about where the Magi were from and what direction they went. The Magi came from the same area that Abram is right now at the beginning of this story. So Abram is in the east, and he's headed to the west toward the same direction, the same area that the Magi traveled. And once he reaches his location, we see in Genesis 12, verses 6 through 7, the first mention of terebinth tree. And it says, Abraham passed through the land to the place of Shechem, as far as the terebinth tree of Moreh. And the Canaanites were then in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your descendants I will give this land. And there he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. So a covenant is being made underneath the terebinth tree. And what a covenant is, it is a binding promise. So God makes a promise, and God is true to his word. But for Abram and Sarai, this is very strange, because when Abram left the place where his father lived and started traveling, he was 75 years old. And notice I said it was Abram, it was Sarai, and it was his nephew Lot. Abram didn't have any children. So how are his descendants going to bless the entire earth? That takes a lot of faith on Abram's part and on Sarai's. So let's take a look as we go a little bit further in the story. Now, Abram, Sarai, and Lot continued their life in the place where they had set up, but a famine hit the land. And they had to leave. They had to go and look for food. So they moved toward Egypt. And this is a whole nother story. I won't get into the whole thing, but I'll just give you a brief overview of it. While they were there, he kind of gets in trouble with the Pharaoh. He offends him. He lies to him. And the Pharaoh finds out. And he basically asks Abram and his family just to leave. Just go ahead and leave. So they did. They took his advice and they left. And they went back to the land of Canaan. By this time, Abram and Lot have become extremely wealthy, and the land cannot support both of their flocks and herds. To keep there from being any type of problem in the family, they decide they'll just go ahead and split. Lot decides to move over to the plain of Jordan, and Abram stays in Canaan. And then we see in Genesis 13:18, then Abram moved his tent and went and dwelt by the terebinth trees of Mamre, which are in Hebron, and built an altar there to the Lord. Now this is where God promises him a son. But before we go on with the story, let's take a look at the art again. I'm going to be using this Winsor Newton flat brush. Then I have a Derwent ink tints pencil. This is Baked Earth. I apologize, it went a little blurry there. I have a cup of water, and then I have some washi tape. I'm going to tape around the outside because my first entry in the book, I did this and I wanted to keep it consistent, so that's what I did. I also used some of it on the rocks down below that I wanted to keep white. I don't like using masking fluid. I also don't like taping my work because I find that most generally I damage my paper when I do those things, but I wanted to give it a try on this. So I'm going over everything with the ink tints pencil. I want to give it an aged look, and I have found that the Baked Earth is really good for that. One of you had suggested that I do the ink tints pencils to create a tea look because I was painting with tea, and tea is rather acidic, and I didn't want to, damage anything for the future. So I switched over. I thought it was a wonderful idea. And if you have never used Derwent ink tints, they are an ink-based water-soluble pencil. I hope I got that right for everyone. Usually I call them a watercolor pencil. They are a different creature than a watercolor pencil, but to be fair, in America, The box that I have says that it is a watercolor ink pencil, so they do call it a watercolor pencil on our box. What I've done is just I've gone as evenly and as lightly as I could to give it a nice wash over here, going over it with water. I'll go over it several times back and forth just to make certain I have activated all of the pigment and there's not any dark areas on here, and then I'm gonna let it dry. Now it's dried, the magic of television, it has dried, and I'm taking the tape off. Yeah, I'm going to tear my paper. I promise you I will. One of you suggested that I should use a hair dryer to kind of heat it up before I pull things off. It's not that I'm lazy. I think it's that I have ADHD and I just get excited about doing things. And so I do it and then I pay for it later. But we're going to get the tape off here. I'm going slowly. This isn't as good as my tape pull in the first one. That one worked out really well. But I'm trying to be careful around those little rocks. The rocks worked out great. So I was very happy about that. I cut and I kind of ripped the paper so there would be some organic edges, and it worked out fine, so I was pleased with that. But we're going to go ahead and pull this off, and I'm going to let you see. I did this as a very light coat. The one I did on the first entry in the book was a little bit darker. I kind of like the lighter look. To me, it looks more aged, and there you can see I ripped the paper a bit. It kind of hurt my feelings, but I think it'll be okay. The rocks, I was very pleased with the rocks. You can see that's a bit darker and that's a bit lighter. So you can get two different versions of it. And yes, it goes outside of the box. Some of the tree does and some of the land will, but that's okay. I'm using a size 6 and a size 3 round. These are also Winsor Newton. And then we have the Derwent Graphitint. Now, I had used it previously, and I'll clean out that palette. I like a clean palette before I start. And when I start, I like to put water in the palette and then get my color and bring it over to the palette. It saves on product and actually saves on time. As we go through this, you will notice that I'll have the colors listed at the bottom. This is Ocean Blue. The trick to using Graphitint, if you have never used Graphitint before, is to let it dry between the layers. You can actually layer it like watercolor, but again, this is not watercolor. This is liquid graphite, so don't mistake it for watercolor. It's completely different. If I wanted to mix stuff with watercolor, and I could go back in at this point and go right on top of it, even if we're a little damp, I'd have to be careful. But with Graphitint, if you go back on top of it before it's completely dry, it's like using an eraser with the water, and it pulls up everything that you've done before. So at this point, I'm just going to get a nice base color on everything, let it completely dry, and then we're going to come back and add some more layers on top. Now, when I'm doing this, I actually have my window open. You can see my sheer curtains going back and forth across the piece. It was a warm day down south, and this was in December, but we had almost a full week that we had 70-degree weather, which was atypical for where I live. Generally, it's somewhere in the 40s at this time of the year. We don't necessarily see snow in December. That comes when we're hoping for spring in March, and it rips our hopes away and gives us, a foot of snow. But not every year, and generally it's about 6 inches, but when you live down south, it seems like a foot. But I was able to keep the window open and let all of this dry. So it may look like I don't have any drying time when I'm working through some of the video coming up, but it's actually drying quite well. I'm wanting the tree to be green, but a lot of the tree has a yellow base to it. That's why I chose this color, Meadow, to come underneath, because it has like a nice yellow base to it. And I can put the blue on top, and you will see that in the areas where I put the blue on top, it gives me a nice yellow green, because there aren't really good greens in this set. You have to make your greens. And I have found that it's, you can make the green or you can layer it. And for this, I'm going to be doing both. I'm starting with the yellow, and then I'm going to come back and put the other greens that I make right on top. So let's get back to our story. When we left, God had promised Abram a son. It was also around this time that God changes Abram's name to Abraham and Sarai's name to Sarah. Because you see, in the Bible, when someone goes through a life change, they change their name as well. We see that several times throughout the Bible. So from this point on, I will be referring to him as Abraham and to her as Sarah. So let's take a look at Genesis 18, 1 through 2. Then the Lord appeared to him by the terebinth trees of Mamre as he was sitting in the tent door in the heat of the day. So he lifted his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing by him, and when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the ground. So he recognized that God was there to visit. Let's go on and see what happens after this. Genesis 18, 10 through 11, and then verse 14. And he said, I will certainly return to you according to the time of life, and behold, Sarah your wife shall have a son. Now Sarah was listening in the tent door, which was behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, well advanced in age, and Sarah had passed the age of childbearing. And God said to them, because Sarah at this point is kind of laughing at this, and God catches her. And he says, is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time, I will return to you according to the time of life, and Sarah shall have a son. Let's stop there for just a moment and let's go back to the art. As you can see, I have mixed a few colors up here. Everything has dried, as I said, and I am going back over the top and adding some of that blue-green. Now I'm going to mix up a few more colors, and this took me several days to paint, so I'm coming back on another day and I'm finishing this up. So again, you're going to see things drying and me painting on top. Let's see what happens. Now that God has reassured them, he was going to give them a son, because God is true to his word. And certainly when God came back later at the appointed time, Sarah and Abraham had a son, and his name was Isaac. And Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born. Now we're going to fast forward to 900 to 1,000 years later, and the people who came from Abraham were now very numerous, and they were called Israelites. They also have an earthly king at this point named Saul. Saul was having trouble with a group of people called the Philistines, and they were at war. They gathered in an area that was owned by the tribe of Judah, and this is where we came in with David and Goliath. And the Israelites were on one mountain, and the Philistines were on the other, and between them was this valley of Elah. And the huge problem that Saul had was the Philistines' champion, who was a giant from Gath named Goliath. What Saul had on his side were a bunch of cowards and a shepherd who played the harp and wrote songs, and none of his men wanted to go out and take on Goliath, except for one person, and that would be the shepherd who played the harp and wrote the songs. That shepherd was David. So let's take a look at 1 Samuel 17, 2 through 3. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah, or the valley of the terebinth tree, and drew up in a battle array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, with the valley between them. David takes on Goliath, and he takes with him his slingshot and 5 smooth stones. He only uses one, because with that one shot, he takes down the giant. So years later, after Saul's death, David would be crowned king of Israel, as was instructed by God through the prophet Samuel. David reigned for 40 years, and his son Solomon was crowned king in his place. Solomon was full of wisdom and obeyed the words of God that came to him through his father David. God comes to Solomon and makes a promise to him. But before we go any further, let's go back to the art. You'll notice that I'm working with even darker colors. And this is how I work with the Graphitint. I start with the lightest color, which was that meadow, and I slowly build up the other layers on top. So we're wanting to work on those shadows. And again, it is very important. I can't say this enough. Wait until it's dry. If you see that something's not dark enough, because I do see that on here, come back once it's dry and add the other colors on top. Let's take a look at that promise that God made Solomon, and that's in 1 Kings 9, 4 through 7. Now, if you walk before me as your father David walked, in integrity of heart and in uprightness, to do according to all that I have commanded you, and if you keep my statutes and my judgments, then I will establish the throne of your kingdom over Israel forever, as I promised David your father, saying, you shall not fail to have a man on the throne of Israel. But if you or your sons at all turn from following me and do not keep my commandments and my statutes, which I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut off Israel from the land which I have given them. And this house which I have consecrated for my name, I will cast out of my sight. Israel will be a proverb and a byword among all the people. So Solomon, unfortunately, does not remain faithful to God, and the result of this is a division of the kingdom after his death. The resulting kingdoms were Israel and Judah was made up of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. But both of these would fall to other countries. Israel would fall to Assyria and Judah to Babylon. If you're reading in the Old Testament, you're going to come to a section that is just prophets. And one of those prophets is Isaiah. And Isaiah was a prophet during the time that the kingdoms were split, but the kingdoms had not fallen to the Assyrians or the Babylonians. And Isaiah says to us in 6:13, and see if you can pick up what he's talking about here, but yet a tenth will be in it, and will return and be for consuming, as the terebinth tree or as an oak, whose stump remains when it is cut down, so the holy seed shall be its stump. And that is where the strength and the resilience of the terebinth tree, that's why God picked that to use as imagery in the Bible, because it is a strong tree, because it can come back from his stump. And that stump of Israel and the holy seed, it's going to lead straight to Jesus. So that's where Jesus goes all the way back to Noah, goes all the way back to Adam, and you have that original covenant under the terebinth tree. So that is where my rabbit hole took me. But there is one more thing in the book of Job. And Job is written before you're talking about Isaiah, before the fall of the kingdoms. Job 14:7 says, for there is hope for a tree if it is cut down, that it will sprout again, and that its tender shoots will not cease. So even Job is talking about that terebinth tree and giving a nod to what is going to happen in the future to the Israelites and the coming Messiah from the tribe of Judah. Let's go back and take a look at the art again. As you can see, I'm going back to some of those midtones that I put on in like my second layers. I've also added in a little bit of red tones to this, a little more brown, because this tree was not completely green. It had a lot of color in it, and I wanted to add that depth and a little more dimension to it by doing that. I'm also trying to be careful not to draw every leaf. When you're drawing a tree from the distance like this, you want to think clumps and you don't want to think individual leaves, because honestly, with the human eye, you can't see the individual leaves. When you're just looking at it, all you see are the clumps and the colors. So that's what I'm concentrating on here, just the clumps and the colors. And I want to come back in when the last things I'm going to do is try to get all of those shadows under the tree. We are coming to the final details on the tree. And if you have joined me to this point, thank you so much for hanging in there. I'm so glad you're here. I hope you enjoyed my rabbit hole, and I hope you'll join me for more of these in the future. So what I'm doing at this point, I'm picking up a little more blue-green. I'm adding just one more green in there. The dark, you know, it's kind of like if you give a mouse a cookie. If you've listened to me on here before, you've heard me say that. You do one thing, then you have to do something else. So I added the dark in, and now I want to add a little bit of medium so I can blend that in with the rest of the lights and the mediums in the tree. Just kind of work it all together. So I will start light, I gradually go up to dark, and then I kind of go backwards again. And it's just, you know, kind of a dance going back and forth to get all the colors in there just right. Again, thank you so much for being here. And don't forget to check out the description, because that's where I will have all of my supplies listed, all of the references for the photo, for all of the Bible verses, all of that will be down below. And if you have any questions or comments, whether it's about art or it's about Bible, please put those down below. I always love to hear from you guys. And if it's something I can't answer, then I know someone in our community can do so. I have a lot of stuff coming up. I'm going to be doing some more gouache, kind of looking forward to that, and doing some more impressionism, and of course having some more of the Wonder Journal on here. I hope you'll join me for that, my friends. But until then, I will see you in the next one.